Well, that was unexpected, Eleanor commented as the group watched Phillips drive away. Patricia Wilcox, using her powers for good. Patricia laughed. Don't sound so surprised. As the festival drew to a close, Patricia found herself sitting with Richard on a bench overlooking the community pond, now arranged with native plants instead of the manicured non-native landscaping she had once insisted upon. Happy? Richard asked, his arm around her shoulders. Patricia considered the question carefully. The past year had stripped away her carefully constructed identity, forced her to confront her worst qualities, and rebuild her life from the ground up. She had lost status, income, and the illusion of control she had cherished for so long. Yet somehow, she felt more authentic than she had in decades. The constant anxiety of maintaining perfection had eased. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed: empathy, adaptability, even the ability to laugh at herself occasionally. I'm getting there, she answered honestly. It's not the life I planned, but maybe it's the one I needed. As they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink, Patricia noticed a young couple pushing a stroller toward one of the newly renovated trails. The woman waved hesitantly at Patricia, who recognized her as a new resident who had moved in last month. Patricia waved back, remembering how she had helped them navigate the now streamlined approval process for the nursery addition they were planning. The husband had whispered his thanks, explaining that 3 other communities had subtly discouraged them from buying because of their growing family. You know what the strangest part is? Patricia mused. I used to think I was protecting this community, but I was actually making it smaller, less diverse, less accommodating, less human. Richard squeezed her hand. And now, Patricia watched as Eleanor and Tom Reynolds joined the young family on the trail, Eleanor navigating her wheelchair effortlessly on the smooth surface that had replaced the gravel path. Nearby, Melissa was deep in conversation with Sandra about the next phase of accessibility improvements. Now I understand that true community isn't about perfect lawns or matching mailboxes, Patricia said. It's about creating spaces where everyone belongs. As night fell, and the last festival goers drifted toward home, Patricia helped the cleanup crew fold tables and stack chairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, another disputed covenant interpretation, more resistance from traditionalists who preferred the old ways, her ongoing struggle to rebuild her professional reputation. But for now, she was simply a neighbor among neighbors, doing her part to nurture the community she had once sought to control. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. Patricia knew that some residents would never fully trust her again, and her own journey toward genuine change would likely be the work of a lifetime. Yet in the glow of the community center lights, surrounded by the imperfect, wonderful diversity of her neighbors, Patricia Wilcox felt something she had never expected to find in the aftermath of her public downfall: hope. And that, she was discovering, was enough to build on. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center buzzed with an unusual energy that evening. Typically, HOA meetings attracted only the most dedicated or disgruntled residents, but tonight every seat was filled. Word had spread quickly about the Reynolds ramp, and neighbors were taking sides. Patricia arrived 15 minutes early, as was her custom, wearing her power suit and carrying a leather portfolio embossed with the HOA logo she commissioned last year. She nodded curtly to the other board members as they arranged their materials at the front table. We may need to address the Reynolds situation tonight, warned Roger Diaz, the board treasurer who had always been a bit too soft in Patricia's opinion. People are talking. It's not a situation, Patricia corrected him. It's a covenant violation that has been resolved. We'll stick to the agenda. But when Patricia called the meeting to order at precisely 7:00 p.m., she immediately noticed 3 unfamiliar faces in the front row. In the center sat a woman in her 30s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, her expression coolly professional as she reviewed documents spread across her lap. Before we begin, the woman announced, standing up without waiting for recognition, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Melissa Reynolds, attorney at law, representing my parents, Tom and Eleanor Reynolds. Patricia's grip tightened on her gavel. We have a procedure for addressing the board, Ms. Reynolds. You'll need to sign up for the public comment period at the end of our regular business. Melissa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Actually, under state law governing homeowners associations, any member has the right to be heard when their property rights are being materially affected. And since my mother is currently trapped in her home because someone, her gaze locked with Patricia's, illegally destroyed her accessibility accommodation, I think we qualify. A murmur rippled through the audience. Patricia felt a bead of sweat form at her hairline. We have documentation that your parents were in violation, Patricia began. What we have, Melissa interrupted, her voice measured but firm, is a clear violation of the Fair Housing Amendments Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and state accessibility laws, not to mention destruction of private property, which is a criminal matter. She approached the board table and placed a thick folder in front of Patricia. This is a formal complaint that will be filed tomorrow with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and the State Attorney General's office if we don't reach a resolution tonight. Patricia winced. That used to be me. Yes, Melissa agreed bluntly. It was. She hesitated, then added, which is why I suggested they contact you. Your insider perspective could help their case. Patricia turned to her in surprise. You referred them to me? Don't make me regret it, Melissa warned, but her eyes held a glimmer of what might have been respect. Before Patricia could respond, a commotion broke out near the community center entrance. A man in an expensive suit was arguing loudly with Sandra and other board members. That's Carson Phillips, Richard murmured, appearing at Patricia's side. The developer who's been trying to buy out the empty lots on Oak Ridge Circle. Patricia frowned. What's he doing here? Causing trouble, from the looks of it. As they drew closer, they could hear Phillips' angry demands. Your covenants clearly state that all common areas must be accessible for showing to prospective buyers. You can't block me from touring the facilities during this event. Sandra looked flustered. It's a private community gathering, Mr. Phillips. We'd be happy to arrange a tour on another day, according to your own bylaws, which I have right here. Phillips waved the document triumphantly. Patricia recognized the tactic immediately. It was one she had used countless times herself. Find an obscure rule, twist its interpretation, and use it as a battering ram to get your way. Before she could think better of it, Patricia stepped forward. Actually, Mr. Phillips, that provision was amended 3 months ago during our comprehensive covenant revision. Common areas can be restricted during official community events, with 24-hour notice, which was posted at all entrances. She smiled pleasantly. I should know. I wrote the original rule you're citing. Phillips turned his glare on her. And you are? Patricia Wilcox, former HOA president, current Covenant Review Committee chair, and, she paused for effect, specialized real estate agent very familiar with local property law. The confrontation ended shortly after, with Phillips retreating to his luxury car with promises of legal action that everyone knew would go nowhere. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Dialogue event had been Sandra Lee's idea, but to everyone's surprise, it was Patricia who volunteered to organize it. 6 weeks after the ramp incident, the community center was once again filled to capacity, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different from that fateful board meeting. Instead of a formal dais separating the board from residents, chairs were arranged in a large circle. Easels with large notepads stood ready for brainstorming. On a side table, Patricia had arranged refreshments, including, she noted with a small smile, Eleanor Reynolds' famous lemon bars, made from a recipe Patricia had once tried to ban from community events because they didn't meet presentation standards. Thank you all for coming, Patricia began, her voice lacking its former authoritarian edge. I know many of you are surprised to see me leading this meeting, given recent events. A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the crowd. Patricia had spent the past weeks in a state of uncommon humility, volunteering for the Neighborhood Watch and the Welcoming Committee, positions she'd previously considered beneath her. The truth is, I've had a lot of time to reflect on what happened with the Reynolds family and my approach to the HOA in general, she continued. I was so focused on property values that I forgot about the people who make up this community. From her seat near the door, Melissa Reynolds watched with professional skepticism. She had spent her career dealing with people like Patricia, people who only changed when forced to, and she wasn't entirely convinced by this apparent transformation. Today isn't about me, Patricia said, seeming to sense the lingering doubt. It's about reimagining our community guidelines to ensure they serve everyone. I've invited experts in accessibility and community planning to help us, and the Reynolds family has generously agreed to share their perspective. Over the next 3 hours, residents voiced long-standing frustrations with HOA restrictions. The young family who wanted to install eco-friendly solar panels. The retired teacher who'd been fined for planting native wildflowers instead of the approved non-native landscaping. The widower who couldn't keep up with lawn maintenance requirements after his wife's death. Patricia took notes diligently, asking thoughtful questions. When Eleanor spoke about the isolation she'd felt when neighborhood events weren't accessible to her, Patricia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I never considered how many people were struggling to fit into a mold that didn't acknowledge their needs. Patricia admitted, "That's on me, and I'm truly sorry." Patricia's morning routine had been sacred for 15 years. Wake at 5:30 am, 30 minutes on the treadmill, shower, breakfast smoothie, and a neighborhood walk to inspect for violations before leaving for her real estate office at 8:15 sharp. Control and order were the foundations of her success. But on this morning, 3 days after the disastrous HOA meeting, Patricia couldn't bring herself to leave the house. Her perfectly curated social media feed was flooded with a local news story. HOA president faces backlash after removing disabled woman's access ramp. The comments beneath were vicious, many from her own neighbors. Richard placed a coffee mug on the kitchen island beside her. The contracting crew is at the Reynolds house already. They're rebuilding the ramp. Patricia didn't look up from her tablet. Did you see what Sharon Peterson wrote? 20 years of friendship, and she's calling me a monster online. You did have her koi pond filled in last year, Richard reminded her. It violated the water feature guidelines. Patricia protested, then deflated slightly. I never thought people actually hated me. Richard sighed and sat beside her. Patty, you've been ruling this neighborhood with an iron fist for years. Did you really think everyone appreciated getting fined because their grass was half an inch too tall? The doorbell rang, interrupting what promised to be their third argument in as many days. Patricia opened the door to find Roger Diaz and 2 other board members standing uncomfortably on her porch. We need to talk, Roger said, his normally friendly face grave. The board held an emergency session last night. Patricia stiffened. Without notifying me? That's against the bylaws. Actually, said Sandra Lee, stepping forward, the bylaws allow for emergency meetings when there's risk of significant liability to the association. She handed Patricia an envelope. We voted to remove you as president, effective immediately. The world seemed to tilt beneath Patricia's feet. You can't do that. I've given everything to this community. That's the problem, Roger replied gently. You've been giving us what you think we need, not what we actually want. The legal exposure from the Reynolds situation was just the final straw. After they left, Patricia sat motionless at her kitchen table, the dismissal letter open before her, her phone pinged with an email notification. The real estate brokerage where she worked was concerned about the negative publicity and suggested she take some time off until the situation resolves. In the space of 3 days, the 2 pillars of her identity, HOA president and successful realtor, had crumbled. Who was Patricia Wilcox without her authority? That afternoon, avoiding neighbors' stares, Patricia drove to the small park at the edge of the development. She needed space to think, away from Richard's quietly smug, I told you so attitude. Sitting on a bench overlooking the pond, she noticed an elderly man struggling to navigate the park's gravel path with his walker. Without thinking, Patricia rose to help him. That path is terrible for mobility devices. The parks committee should have it paved. The man looked at her with surprise. You're Patricia Wilcox, aren't you? The HOA president who's all over the news. Patricia winced. Former president, apparently. To her surprise, the man chuckled. You know, I tried for 3 years to get the previous board to improve these paths. Maybe you were just enforcing bad rules. Patricia's mouth went dry as she flipped through the meticulously prepared legal documents. This wasn't supposed to happen. People complained about her methods sometimes, but they always backed down eventually. No one had ever fought back like this. The board needs time to review these materials with our attorney, Patricia managed, trying to regain control of the meeting. By all means, Melissa agreed pleasantly. While you do that, I'll be happy to explain to everyone here exactly what federal housing discrimination looks like and the personal liability that each board member could face. As Melissa turned to address the now captivated audience, Patricia's phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Fix this and oh, our insurance doesn't cover discrimination claims. For the next 30 minutes, Patricia watched helplessly as Melissa delivered what amounted to a masterclass on housing rights and HOA overreach, complete with precedent cases where board members had been held personally liable for damages. In conclusion, Melissa said, "My parents will need a new ramp installed by tomorrow evening, approval for their permanent ramp design within 7 days, and a formal apology from the board. Otherwise, we proceed with legal action." During the emergency recess that followed, Patricia huddled with the other board members in the small kitchen behind the meeting room. "We have to approve it," hissed Diaz. "I'm not risking my retirement savings on this." "She's bluffing," Patricia insisted, though her confidence was wavering. "If we give in on this, everyone will start challenging the covenants." Board member Sandra Lee, who had always supported Patricia, shook her head. "My sister uses a wheelchair, Patty. What happened today wasn't right, and you know it." When they returned to the meeting room, Patricia noticed several of her most loyal supporters had moved to sit near the Reynolds family. The shift in power was palpable, and for the first time in 5 years, Patricia realized she might not win this battle. "The board will approve the temporary ramp immediately," she announced stiffly, "and expedite review of the permanent structure." "And the apology?" Melissa prompted. Patricia's face flushed hot with humiliation. "And I personally apologize for any inconvenience to your mother." Melissa's expression remained neutral. "That's a start. Now let's discuss the financial compensation for today's property damage and emotional distress." As the meeting continued well past its scheduled end time, Patricia began to understand that her carefully constructed kingdom was crumbling around her, and somewhere deep inside, past the embarrassment and anger, a tiny voice wondered if she'd been wrong all along. This simple observation hit Patricia like a revelation. She had been so focused on enforcing the rules that she'd never questioned whether the rules themselves were fair or necessary. Driving home, Patricia took a detour past the Reynolds house. A construction crew was putting the finishing touches on a sturdy wooden ramp, while Eleanor watched from her porch. On impulse, Patricia parked her car and walked up the driveway. Eleanor's expression hardened when she spotted Patricia. "Come to find some new violation?" "No," Patricia said quietly. "I came to see the ramp. It's nice work." Eleanor studied her suspiciously. "It's exactly what we originally proposed, the one you rejected 3 times. Patricia nodded, swallowing her pride with difficulty. "I was wrong. Not just about the ramp, but about a lot of things." "Well," Eleanor said after a long moment, "that's a start." As Patricia turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. "The neighborhood picnic committee is meeting tomorrow. They need volunteers." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was an opening. And for the first time in years, Patricia considered what it might be like to be part of her community instead of ruling over it. That evening, instead of reviewing covenant violations, Patricia found herself researching the Americans with Disabilities Act and fair housing regulations. The realization of how many of the HOA's policies were potentially discriminatory was both horrifying and strangely liberating. She had been wrong, demonstrably, legally wrong, and acknowledging that fact opened a door to a new perspective. Richard found her still at the computer near midnight. Coming to bed? Patricia looked up, her eyes red from hours of reading. "Did you know that 61 million Americans live with a disability? That's 1 in 4 adults. How many people in Oak Ridge Estates have I made feel unwelcome in their own homes?" Richard squeezed her shoulder gently. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? The electric wheelchair's motor whirred to a stop as Eleanor Reynolds stared in disbelief at the sight before her. The wooden ramp that had connected her front door to the driveway, her lifeline to the outside world, lay in splintered pieces on her lawn. Standing over the destruction, clipboard in hand, and a victorious smile plastered across her face, was Patricia Wilcox, HOA president and self-appointed guardian of Oak Ridge Estates property values. I gave you 3 notices, Eleanor, Patricia announced, her voice carrying across the manicured lawns, where neighbors pretended not to watch. Unapproved structures must be removed. The board has spoken. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, seemingly oblivious to the fact that she'd just cut off a disabled woman's access to her own home. Eleanor's husband Tom rushed from the house, his face flushed with anger. What have you done? My wife needs that ramp. Patricia's smile never faltered. Then you should have filed the proper paperwork and used approved materials. This, she gestured dismissively at the demolished ramp, was an eyesore and reduced property values for everyone. What Patricia didn't notice was Eleanor reaching for her phone, quietly dialing a number she knew by heart. Eleanor's voice was calm as she spoke. Melissa? It's your mother. You'll never believe what Patricia Wilcox from the HOA just did. Patricia's smug expression wavered slightly at the mention of Eleanor's daughter. Everyone in Oak Ridge Estates knew Melissa Reynolds was a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking on cases that made headlines. Your little DIY project violated 6 separate HOA covenants, Patricia continued, recovering quickly. The Architectural Review Committee rejected your application last month. You can't just build whatever you want. Tom stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. That was a temporary ramp because the committee has been reviewing our permanent application for 8 months. My wife has multiple sclerosis. How is she supposed to get in and out of our house now? Patricia's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her clipboard. That's not the HOA's problem. Rules exist for a reason. What Patricia didn't understand, what would soon upend her carefully controlled world, was that she had just made the biggest mistake of her carefully curated suburban life. She wasn't just facing an angry homeowner. She was about to go to war with someone who understood exactly how to fight back. You have until the end of the day to clear this debris, Patricia instructed, already turning away. Or you'll be fined an additional $100 per day. As Patricia walked away in her immaculate white tennis shoes, her phone chimed with a notification. The screen displayed a calendar reminder. Oak Ridge Estates board meeting, 7 p.m. Tonight would be her 5-year anniversary as board president, and she had planned a small celebration complete with a slideshow highlighting her achievements in maintaining property values. The timing couldn't be more perfect. What she didn't realize was that Eleanor was still on the phone with Melissa, who was already printing out copies of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act. Patricia's celebration would be short-lived. Later that afternoon, Patricia sat at her kitchen island, reviewing her presentation for the evening's meeting. Her husband Richard poured himself a scotch and leaned against the counter. Another successful day protecting our investment, he asked, though the sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable. The Reynolds had an illegal ramp, Patricia replied defensively. I was just doing my job. Richard sighed. Their daughter is Melissa Reynolds. You know, the civil rights attorney who took down the mayor of Springfield last year. For the first time that day, Patricia felt a flicker of unease, but she quickly dismissed it. After all, this wasn't discrimination. It was just enforcing the rules everyone agreed to when they moved into Oak Ridge Estates. Rules that Patricia had dedicated herself to upholding no matter what. Rules that were about to be her undoing. After the formal discussion ended, Patricia approached Melissa as people mingled over coffee and cookies. Your mother's ramp looks beautiful, by the way. The cedar was a good choice. Melissa studied her carefully. You seem different. Patricia smiled faintly. Getting publicly humiliated and losing your job tends to provide perspective. Is that all it is? Saving face? At first. Probably, Patricia admitted with surprising candor. But then I started actually listening to people. Do you know Evelyn Martinez has been carrying her daughter's wheelchair up and down her porch steps for 3 years because she was afraid to ask for an accommodation after seeing how I treated others? What kind of person does that make me? Melissa's professional reserve softened slightly. A person who's capable of change, apparently. As Patricia walked home that evening, neighbors waved or nodded in greeting, civil, if not entirely warm. It was more acknowledgement than she'd received in weeks, when most had crossed the street to avoid her. Richard was waiting on their porch, drinking iced tea and reading. How was the Grand Community Summit? Patricia sat beside him, kicking off her shoes with uncharacteristic casualness. Enlightening. We're forming 3 committees to revise the covenants. One for accessibility, one for environmental sustainability, and one for aesthetic guidelines that actually make sense. And they want you involved. After everything? Patricia laughed softly. Shockingly, yes. Sandra thinks my attention to detail could be an asset if redirected toward inclusion rather than restriction. She paused. I'm also going to take the real estate licensing course again. Richard raised an eyebrow. You already have a license. Yes, but I'm specializing in accessible housing this time. There's actually a huge unmet need. She reached for his hand. I've spent 15 years telling people what they can't do in their homes. Maybe it's time I help people find homes that actually work for them. Later that night, Patricia stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood she had once ruled with meticulous authority. Porch lights glowed warmly against the darkness. In the distance, she could see the outline of the Reynolds house, now accessible to Eleanor thanks to the ramp Patricia had fought so hard to prevent. For years, Patricia had measured her worth by her ability to control her environment and the people in it. Now she was learning a different kind of strength, the power that comes from letting go, from listening instead of commanding, from building bridges instead of walls. It wasn't comfortable. Every day brought new realizations of harm she'd caused through her rigid enforcement. But for the first time in her adult life, Patricia was facing her mistakes instead of denying them. And in that painful honesty, she was discovering a version of herself she might actually grow to respect.